Welcome to EoZTV. I'm Elder of Zion, and we are here with Eugene Konotrovich, an international law scholar, and I'm very excited to have him here. Here in, I imagine you're in Israel right now, right?
I am.
Okay. What we're going to be speaking about is international law, obviously, because that's what you're good at. I have a few topics today that I'd like to speak about. The first one, and the most important one, is to talk about the idea that Israel might be extending sovereignty over parts of the West Bank. It's causing a lot of angst and anger, and among our European friends. And I wanted to first go over just the actual legal case that we have, or that Israel has, for doing such a thing.
Okay, so first of all, let's just be clear what exactly we're talking about Israel doing. People use different words: annexation, extending sovereignty. I think it's important to understand what we're talking about. What we're talking about is Israel basically passing a law or making a cabinet decision, like the Jerusalem law or the Golan law, that would directly apply Israeli civil law to those parts of Judea and Samaria where Jews currently live, and really just those parts. Israel took a similar measure with that part of Judea and Samaria that is known as East Jerusalem in 1967, and it just basically changes the mode through which these territories are governed. So the term that's widely used is annexation, which I think is very inaccurate, because annexation has a clear definition in international law. Annexation is when you take the territory of one country and make it your own, having forcibly taken it. And the territory in question, holding aside even whether it's Israel's or not, is certainly not the territory of another country. So it's not like, when Russia took Crimea from Ukraine, and then incorporated it into Russia, it was annexation, because it was taking undisputed Ukrainian territory. But it's not the position of the United States or most of the EU that these territories belong to any other state. Now, indeed, then I would go further and say that Israel actually has the strongest sovereign claim. So Israel is really just changing the mode of governance of a land to which it has a legitimate sovereign title in the first place.
Okay, but you're saying that most nations do not recognize it as belonging to any other sovereign, but clearly the UN uses the term
That's
occupied
correct.
Palestinian territory. Clearly other people are calling it that. There seems to be at least a weird sort of consensus, though I haven't been able to figure out exactly how, that the territory is considered Palestinian. Is it? Is it not? How does that work?
Okay, so it's definitely not occupied, nor is it Palestinian. But again, the United Nations isn't actually isn't a country. The territory is definitely not occupied, and I think one would see this under sort of all opinions, so to speak. Now, what's occupation mean? Occupation is when a country in a time of war takes territory of a hostile power, a hostile country, and begins to administer it, right? To sit behind the desk in City Hall. So America occupied Iraq, for example, in 2003. The United States occupied Berlin from 1945 to 1990. It's not a bad thing, but it's when you take the territory of another country and administer it. Now, what happens if a country recaptures its own territory in war? That can hardly be called an occupation. That's called recapturing your own territory. That's why the central aspect here is that it has to be enemy territory. Mm-hmm. So in 1967, was this territory enemy territory? Now, it was certainly held by an enemy country, Jordan, but does that make it Jordanian territory? Absolutely not. Mm-hmm. Because all of this territory in question, all the areas, Israel, the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, they were all part of the mandate for Palestine until 1948. It's uncontroversial.
Yes.
And then, at the expiration of the mandate for Palestine, Israel declared its independence. So the question is, what are Israel's borders? Now, the Declaration of Independence didn't specify any borders, mm-hmm. which is not unusual. Declarations of independence tend not to do that. But because there's a default international rule, which throughout the world for figuring out the borders of new countries. And that is that when a country is created in a previous non-independent setting, the its borders are those of the previous top-level administrative unit. The previous sovereign is the mandate. So then that means that the default borders of Israel are the borders of the League of Nations mandate, which of course include Judea and Samaria. And of course, this would put some people in Israel who would not be happy being there, but that's the case of every country that came out of mandate, right? The Muslims were not happy to be in Christian Lebanon. The Kurds, Druze, and many others were not happy to be in Syria. The Kurds were not happy to be in Iraq. All these countries were former mandates, and all of their current borders are not based on logic or self-determination or demography. They're based on the borders of the prior mandate.
Well, I believe that
the
counter-argument, if you can hear me, I believe the counter-argument for that is that while the mandate said that there could be a Jewish state in Palestine, it did not really say that the Palestine would be the Jewish state. So So
this argument about the borders actually has nothing to do with the Jewish national home language of the mandate. Mm-hmm. All that language was supposed to do was allow for and create the right and imperative for Jewish immigration to Palestine, which the British largely undermined. And so what's it mean when they say it's a Jewish state? What privileges were the Jews supposed to be? A Jewish national home. What privileges were the Jews supposed to be given? Really none, right? It creates no political privileges for the Jews. Mm-hmm. It just lifts restrictions on their immigration and on their ability to purchase land. Now, clearly, if Jews would not have come, right, and there'd be no Jews there, then you couldn't have a Jewish state. Or if Jews came and then they left, right? The fact that in the mandate for Palestine, in San Remo, they said it's a Jewish national home, isn't going to help if all the Jews choose to move to America in 1950. It's not going to make it a Jewish state. So the point of those provisions was for the interim, right, for the duration of the mandate, mm-hmm. to allow for immigration and to allow for settlement of the land. Once the mandate expires, the mandate is not what's going to make it a Jewish state. Right? It's either going to be a Jewish state or not, based on how it's run and what the government is. However, the mandate also created borders for a new political entity, Mandatory Palestine. Now, it's those borders persist and determine the borders of the next state. Right? The mandate's language isn't going to govern whether Israel is a Jewish state, but its borders do govern Israel's borders. So same thing with Lebanon, for example. Right? Lebanon was supposed to be a majority Christian Arab state. Now, Christians are a minority there, so it's not going to be a Christian state. Nonetheless, its borders don't change. Right? You don't redraw the borders in a way to create a smaller state with a Christian minority majority.
So you're saying that Israel is the presumed successor to the British mandate, to the entire territory of the British mandate.
It's the only possible successor because it's the only country that declared independence in that territory in the wake of the end of the mandate. Now, the Palestinians, at that point, did not declare independence in the territory, and so there's only one possible successor. Because the Arab countries, instead of trying to create a new independent state in Palestine, tried to conquer it instead.
So, so even though the younger state of Israel really made no claims on the rest of the mandate for Palestine, you're saying that they still have the strong.
I wouldn't say they made no claims. They were not in a position to exercise those claims because they had been occupied by Jordan. I think it's clear they constantly made claims to Jerusalem, which was part of this territory. But the state of Israel in 1949 was basically barely hanging on. Mm-hmm. And these in international law, you're sovereign. You don't have to file a notice every 6 months to keep your sovereign territory from disappearing as a result of occupation.
So I apologize. Maybe we'll get him back.
Hey.
Hello.
Sorry, my internet connection is very weak.
Yeah, I see that.
All my children are on their
Oh,
own
okay.
online.
They're on their tablets and phones. I hear. Yeah, you were starting to lose just literally after my last question about saying that you said an argument could be made that there is a state called Palestine now. So can you just go on that?
Yeah, so the Palestinians Palestinian Authority meets much of the international test for statehood, in that they have a territory that they govern, they engage in their own foreign relations, and so forth. The difficulty is, you can meet the criteria for statehood, and just not want to be a state. You need to claim statehood, and of course the Palestinians do claim statehood, but at the same time they make claims incompatible with statehood. Basically, they say that they have become a state, that there is a state of Palestine. Now, to be a state, one of the key requirements in international law is control of your own sort of affairs, internal control, effective control, as it's known in international law. But at the same time, they claim they've been under permanent occupation for, constantly. They've been under foreign occupation. And the test of occupation is that, the occupier is the one that exercises effective control. So you can't have a state become a state if it's under occupation. Mm-hmm. So on one hand, they say, we're occupied, please help us become a state. On the other hand, they say, we are a state, please take us seriously. Those things can't be true at the same time. So, because they have this sort of weird status of claiming and not claiming statehood at the same time, or claiming it and then making sort of logically contrary claims, that, you can say theoretically they might, qualify for statehood, but I don't think they have, they need to pick which claim they're making. Okay. You can't be a state like, in a kind of a superposition, like in a quantum state, either sometimes a state, sometimes not a state. And they want to be a state when it's, when it gets them, seats at the UN, and not a state when it creates, an argument that they're being oppressed and Israel should be pressured to give them the state.
Okay.